Do you want to see something quite interesting about the king in chess? Take a look at this position. You'll see that I've got a chessboard here, and I'm going to clear that board. And I'm going to put just the king, which is the tallest piece, by the way, normally in a chess set. It's also the most important. Why? Because if you trap the king game is over. It's called checkmate when the king is in danger and cannot escape. But look at something fascinating about this king. You know, a king moves one square any direction. You see? So if the king is in a corner, you see how it has 3 squares it can go to? How many squares does the king have if it's sitting on the edge? Can you count them? That's right, 5. And what if the king's in the center of the board, somewhere near the middle? Do you see how the king has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 choices? Well, here's what's really fascinating. When the king is sitting, let's say over here, and you want to move, let's say, and capture something in the far corner, how many turns will it take you? Well, seems simple, doesn't it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you capture that pawn in the corner. But how many different ways can you get there? What if you went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7? You see, that's the same number of turns as if you went straight up the board to it. You see, because the king goes on diagonals, it makes for a very fascinating and interesting possibility in a game of chess. In fact, here's a fun little activity for you. If you had pawns in each corner, and those are markers, and your goal is to go capture them all, how many turns does it take you? Can you figure it out? Excellent. And I want you to return back to the start. You could do this on a chessboard with a friend if you like. You to take turns, move the piece until you get all the way there. You should find out it takes you 7 plus 7 plus 7 and back to the starting square, which is 28 turns. Now, what if I said at the same time, I want you to capture 4 pawns, 4 markers in the middle of the board and still return to this corner and do it in the same number of turns, just 28 total. Can you see how to do it? How many different ways can you figure out? Did you find this one? Up the diagonal, and then maybe to this corner, and then maybe to the other corner, and then back home. And if you move 1 square at a time, you would have found you still took 28 turns, and yet look at how much of the board you covered. You see, this is such a fascinating concept that it actually is used in some very special endgame studies. So if you know how pawns move, let me show you. This position, I'm going to clear my board. We're going to put the light king up here in this far corner. We're going to put a dark pawn here, a light pawn over here, and a dark king here. Now, if you remember how pawns move straight forward. The light pawns, they start on the first rank. See the number 1. The dark pawns, on the second rank. White pieces start on the first and second ranks and move towards the far side. The dark pawns start on the 7th rank and move towards the light side. And pawns, if you remember how pawns move, on their first turn, they have this choice of jumping 2 squares, which makes it really interesting. Check out my video on en passant and some fun rules that are based on this. So here we are, and we have an interesting game. Now watch, it's the dark piece's turn first. And if a pawn reaches the far side of the board, it can turn into a powerful piece. You don't want that to happen for your opponent. Of course, you want to do it yourself. And so as the pawn moves up here, there's 2 choices. This pawn is racing to become a new queen. If we chase it with our king, who's going to win the race? Well, I think that's pretty obvious, isn't it? The pawn's going to get across the board first and become a new piece called pawn promotion. So that's not going to work. Well, what else can we do? What if we make our own pawn into a queen? We can get there first, right? Well, Close, except this king will come back and stop our pawn. As soon as we get to the end, we make it into a new piece, probably a queen, and the king will just take it and then go back to making their own queen, right? Ooh, that doesn't work. So it seems hopeless here, and yet it is not. Unbelievable, but amazing. Look at this. The pawn jumps 2. Remember how we have all these paths to get to this square to stop this pawn? Remember, you can go towards the middle and you get there in the same time. Look, this king can actually move diagonally, and notice what it's doing. It's taking the same number of turns to chase this pawn, and it's getting closer to its own pawn. Hint, hint. Do you see what happens? Let's say the pawn keeps running. Here, our king moves again on the diagonal. Still seems hopeless, but it's not really hopeless anymore, because if this pawn moves forward, our king actually changes direction, moves in here. And when the pawn gets close to queening, we push our pawn close to queening. If their pawn makes a new queen, we get to make a new queen. And if their king tries to stop our pawn, our king is now just close enough to protect it, and we can make a new queen ourselves. Ooh, amazing. So what is the opponent going to do? Here we are. The pawn has moved up. We're up to here. Well, what if the king comes in first and says, I'm just going to go get your pawn first? Well, once again, we just stay on this diagonal. And now if the king takes our pawn, our king is suddenly just close enough to now go capture this pawn. Wow. So what is going to happen? Well, if the king takes the pawn, that doesn't do any good. So the pawn keeps running, and now our king again supports the pawn, and now our pawn is safe. Pawn advances, promotion, promotion. These would both trade into a new piece, likely the queen, and we have an equal position, a king and queen each. Isn't that incredible? How you can go from a place that looks like they're going to get a queen before us as they race forward, and yet you can save the game, all because of this amazing movement of the king on the diagonal to get to the same place in the same number of turns. So I have a fun activity for you to try. Why don't you take a board, clear it off, and then see if you can place 8 pawns on the board in such a way that you can go capture them in just 8 turns, but cover the maximum space on the board. Got that? So in other words, your king starts anywhere you like. You can only move 8 times. Where are you going to place the opponent's pawns? If you put them all around here, they're just going to be a short distance. See how far you can move capturing pawns, spreading over the board because of using the diagonals. Have fun with that. Try some other activities too, because this is a great way to practice with the king, learn about the diagonals. Have fun, and remember to like and subscribe for more chess tips with National Master Elliott Neff.